Now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to this hour of the show. And again, we're going to be talking about another big discovery in Egypt. And to share that information with us, we're going to be talking with Carmen Boulter. And let me tell you a little bit about Carmen and just get her on the air because we don't have enough time. We're going to try to compress everything into an hour. Dr. Carmen Boulter has had an unshakable passion for Egypt, traveling there 25 times. And I think this bio is old and is probably way more than 25. Through embassy support, Carmen did extensive research in the archives of the Egyptian Museum, gaining official access to the rare books library of the Faculty of Archaeology, Cairo University, where the field notes of excavations done around the pyramids in the early 1900s are held. Carmen is the author of Angels and Archetypes, an evolutionary map of the feminine consciousness. She is also the creative fire behind the Pyramid Codes, now on Netflix. She is the director, producer, and writer of the series. Over the past decade, Carmen has been a university professor developing online curriculum. Her latest achievement is interactiveu.com, an online learning and social action network. But after this interview today, I think she might be busy doing a bunch of other stuff too. Her website, pyramidcode.com. Please welcome Dr. Carmen Boulter. Hey, Carmen, how are you?
I'm great. Nice to talk to you, Rita.
I'm just so glad to have you on. A couple of months ago, I had Klaus Donna on, and he was talking about this new technology, and then your name came up. And we were covering so much material. He just said, well, you know, we have these really interesting finds in Egypt, but I really can't talk about it. And then I found, then he mentioned your name, and then I heard that you had gone public with the information. It was like, I got to get Carmen on the show to find out what's going on, because I guess he wasn't really at liberty to give much detail at the time. So, Carmen, what did you guys find? I mean, hopefully not some ex-military base out in the middle of Egypt desert with a big X marks the spot thing in the center.
Well, that's what I found last time when I was looking for this place. And so, So I've been looking for this place for about 25 years, and I thought it was the Giza Plateau. And
all right, back up. What place? A place
that had very, very deep chambers that comes from my past life memory, channeled sessions that I've done with other people, that there is a place that there was a lot of underground activity. It wasn't a residence. It's not like, living underground or any of that, but that it was huge. And in the time that I've been going to Egypt, now it's 29 times, I was running into people who were having memories of this place as well, without me mentioning it. And so I saw this thing in 1996 and at the Star Visions conference with Chelsea Floor, and it was a document that was basically describing the place, but it said the entrance was at the Giza Plateau. So I spent 5 years in and out of the holes, and then there was that expedition I led in February 2012 that ended up being the military leftovers of a target for the Air Force. And then someone sent me a link to this place called the Hawara Labyrinth, and the work had completely stopped on it in 2008. And I started digging around and realizing that Herodotus claims to have been in there and that there's 2 distinct levels, and they were saying 1,500 rooms per level. So I'm like, okay, this may be it. And the people who had done research in the past were using ground-penetrating radar by laying wires on the sand. And the limitation of that was that it could go between 5 and 12 meters deep. And so they were finding anomalies. I'm not convinced they did their research correctly, in that I teach graduate-level research methods. And anyway, so the whole thing stopped. The revolution happened, and nobody went back to it. And so with that site on the military base that I didn't realize, we went in with a hot air balloon. I actually was doing needle in a haystack because I had, on Google Earth, because I had seen the picture. And I found it. and I had the GPS coordinates. So with this other group, they had driven to Hawara, but they didn't have the GPS coordinates. So I spent 2 days just searching the area, and I found it based on ancient maps from Flinders Petrie in 1891. And so I replicated that on Google Earth. I ascertained that the pyramid was there, and I got the coordinates. And about 5 minutes later, Klaus Donna Skyped me. I said, Klaus, I think I found something. He said, send me the KMZ file from Google Earth. And 2 days later, he calls me and he says, earth-shattering, world-changing, oh my God. And so I've been working with the scans since, and I did calculations. I had the shapes of the rooms, the depth of the rooms, whether or not there was gold, water, which there isn't, pottery, which there isn't, and some rooms have bone and gold, both. And so I started calculating, and it turns out that the area above ground measures 81 football fields. It's 107 acres. And the depth is just about 60 feet, one level, 120 feet deep. So we're calling the red level the lower level and the blue level the upper level. It turns out that there's 32 chambers on one side, and on that side there's 1.5 kilometers of passageways. All of the chambers are bigger than the average size house. And 6 of them are bigger than Olympic-sized swimming pools.
That's huge.
Huge. This is like burying a number of airports. The chambers don't connect to one another, and so it doesn't seem like it could possibly have been a temple. Temple have the chambers that one leads to the next until you get to the far back, and it's the Holy of Holies. It's not like a tomb, like Ramses II tomb that has like 72 chambers in it, and they go down, down, down. The 2 levels don't connect to one another. And there's a canal over the top, and the lower level for 800 meters is the shape of the canal. So someone knew what was down there when they put the canal in, and it was Louis de Belfond, who was the one that built the Suez Canal. So there are layers, there are 4 distinct layers at the site, and in archaeology, older is deeper. So Flinders Petrie excavated the Roman level, and they found painted sarcophagi, and it was the first time they'd ever found a painting of the deceased face on the wooden sarcophagus, and they were all like that. That was a style they were establishing then. Then there's the Ptolemaic level, which is Antony and Cleopatra, and they excavated that. But no one has been able to get down to the lower levels. First of all, because they wouldn't have ever guessed that it's that deep. But because of the legends, and because Pliny and Strombo and Petrie and all these different people have been interested in the site, there's legends that go with it. And the people who talked about it from ancient times were at least living 600 years apart. So they weren't talking to each other. And so people kept going back there, and then they put the pyramid on top because it's a mud brick pyramid, and there's no way that that's going to be ancient in the way that this is ancient. And if you think older is deeper, that deep means it's got to be very, very, very old.
Well, but let me ask you, so you said that Petrie excavated part of it and found some Ptolemaic stuff in the painted sarcophagus. Was that just under sand and basically kind of laying on the surface, or was that actually dug into the bedrock like we find in the Valley of the Kings?
No. It was more on the surface, but as I keep saying, older is deeper. So the Ptolemaic layer was underneath the Roman layer, and it wasn't that deep. So yeah, they got it out by, taking those, how they scoop up in the leather, about a gallon-size leather bag, and then, get 100 people and they cart the sand off, and then they sift the sand, and then they found some artifacts. But they're from a completely different time frame.
Well, and I guess where my brain is going is you say we have these enclosures that are bigger than a house, and some of them are as big as an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And so I'm trying to wrap my mind around, okay, but if it's all in sand, then the sand wouldn't make a solid structure. So is it actually, in the bedrock, under the rock, or did they construct walls to make the enclosures? Is that making sense?
Yeah, well, without going and excavating, it's impossible to say. We've got the scan that's indicating with great precision where things are and what's in what room and how big they are and the actual size of the cavities. Now, I don't know how it can be in bedrock. I think they constructed the walls. I think it was always underground. That's just my intuition, and again, we'd have to verify that. But what was described by Herodotus is that the roof, and he said 1,500 rooms. Maybe that's whatever. I don't know what kind of measure he was using or how he would have known, because he doesn't ever claim to have been in the lower level. But he said that the ceiling was constructed of a single slab of stone. Well, okay, how does that work? And then below the bottom, the ground level of the top layer, it's another 20 meters deeper for the ceiling of the one below it. And so these two layers don't intersect at all. It's not like snakes and ladders where you'd see a descending passageway, for example. I personally don't think it's the bedrock. I think somehow they constructed it, and then there's sand in between, and then there's the other level. So this would be more like I think the way it possibly could be excavated is like those sand removal equipment machines that vacuum, like they used in Dubai. They had a barge, and then they put the sand equipment underneath the water and pulled some sand out, and then went and made islands by spewing the sand in a different location. So I think that sand removal equipment, for example, when a sand dune forms over a road, a desert road in Egypt, they vacuum it eventually and clear the road. So that's the sort of thing that I think would, but if they were having guys with baskets, the 1-gallon baskets, it would take 20 years. It would take thousands of people 20 years to excavate. There's so much sand. It's so deep and it's so big.
And so there are 2 layers to the site, or we know about 2 layers, and there are 2 more layers that are more archaic.
Yep, there's 4 layers in all.
Okay.
Now what we have to understand.
But we have awareness of 2, the Roman and the Ptolemaic, but not so much the other 2 that are in there.
No one has had any idea until this scan was done. Now, this technology is relatively new and it's state-of-the-art, and it's like going from a 1 megapixel camera, like when the digital cameras first came out, to a 1,000 megapixel camera. This thing can even detect precious jewels, like a diamond. It's that high resolution and it's that precise. And so it's working with live feed satellites, and it's a software application that is a standing longitudinal wave signature for each element. So it's a different software program. They do the full scan to see if there's pottery. They do the full scan to see where water is, and they keep on going. There's one for gas, there's one for oil, but Klaus and his friend don't like using that because that's disruptive to Mother Earth. But so when people hear about this, they think, well, I've never heard about that, so it can't be true. Well, you know what? There is new technology, and it's little known, and it's only in the last few years that, Klaus has been able to work with governments around the world that are requests, like even California, looking for underground rivers because of the drought. And so they have located at 170 meters deep an underground river under California. And then they go and they verify in various places. There's new pyramids being found in the Philippines. The entrance to the Bosnian pyramids was found with precision. A very interesting Egyptian find in Australia. So the people go to the site and they can't find the entrance, and they contact Klaus, and he says this is exactly where it is. And there's a device that they use in the field that's even more precise. So when this technology was first developed, they had no way of really knowing how reliable the information was because they hadn't gone to the field to test. But as the years go by, Klaus has some 200 sacred sites that they've scanned, and there's governments around the world that aren't as restrictive as Egypt, and they're actually going, and where they suspect there's water and the flow rate and all that is turning out to be precise. And so it seems that this is really, really an extraordinary thing that's going on. Now, the other feature is most ground-penetrating radar, once you hit something, you can't look through it. This technology allows you to look through as many layers as there are.
How far down will it penetrate?
6 kilometers. Like, we're talking deep, deep, deep into the earth.
Well, and I'm going in my mind, okay, so a kilometer is kind of like a mile, but not quite a mile. So if it's 6, we're talking about like definitely more than, a few miles, which is huge.
It's 5/8 of a mile, so it's probably something like 4 miles deep.
That's still huge.
It's huge.
I mean, I'm thinking 60 feet, that's pretty good. That's pretty deep. But several miles,
yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So they found gold in Bolivia, water in Zimbabwe, diamonds in Brunei. And then they go and they dig and they find at the level and in the precise volumes of what this scan is saying, is showing. So a metaphor for it is barcodes on at the grocery store, where they can program uniquely the size of the package, the flavor, the color, whatever. And so you beep, and so the way that barcode scanning technology works is the closest thing in a layman's term to this signature for each element. And so you don't just scan the whole thing and get everything all at once. You've got to scan precisely for the signature of the element.
But it would almost be kind of like using like a infrared versus a thermal imaging versus some other, you're not really measuring the same thing, but you're getting a different data set using different technology. Anyway.
That's an excellent point, because carbon-14 dating is looking for organic material and the rate at which it breaks down. But carbon-14 itself breaks down at about 30,000 years. And the other thing is it's easily contaminated. So a lot of times when people do a carbon-14 date, in fact, they sent one sample to 14 different labs and ended up with 14 dates. To me, carbon-14 is completely unreliable. And when you suspect that something's very, very old, you need a different dating technology. So Klaus has been working with thermoluminescent dating, thermo and photoluminescent dating. And someone like Michael Cremo, that's finding bones that are over 1 million years old, is working with potassium argon dating. And there's other techniques, like they can tell the last time something was heated to an excessive heat, which is the kind of thing, if you found pottery, you'd use that dating technique, and then you could tell when that stone, that pottery was fired.
Well, and it seems like with these new technologies coming online, surprisingly, the dating seems to get pushed back and back and back. Oopsie.
And carbon-14 makes everything look younger, and when you're using different dating techniques, it gets pushed back, unless the lab itself is corrupt, in that in Peru, the Quran and the Bible and history, nothing's supposed to be older than 6,000 years. And so Klaus actually sent a sample to a lab in Peru, and they kept it for over a year. And then he called them up, and they said, yeah, you can come and get it. And they said, you know what, we're not going to charge you. And by the way, the sample's like 5,280 years old. Well, he knew there's no way it's that old. And so when they got the real number, the people at the lab decided they weren't going to tell him. So they gave it back and didn't charge him, because this disrupts history. And I've seen carbon-14 dating the certificate from the Bosnian pyramids between the third and the fourth course of the exterior of the pyramid, and it's dated to 38,000 years ago. And now in Indonesia, they've just dated a place called Ganang Penang, I don't know how to say the word, Padang. Too many G's in the word. And I'm invited to go there in December to be a guest host on the trip. I better learn how to say it. But they've dated that pyramid to 23,000 years old.
I love it when the dates keep going back. I love it. Yeah. So the scans, do they indicate whether we're talking about square rooms with regular surfaces versus something that, and I'm going to say, could be construed as a natural underground chamber?
Impossible that it's natural. Absolutely impossible. Now, the other thing is they called it the Labyrinth. Now, labyrinths are notoriously, circular, and they've got, various configurations. And apparently the person who built the labyrinth in the Minoan culture at Knossos on Crete visited this site before they built the labyrinth there. And the other thing is that there was, in 1671, a copper engraving was copied from something down there. Kircher did this. And it's amazing, full of symbols, and it looks like biology and cosmology and astrology. And in the center is a square that has a labyrinth in it. But all at once, this symbol is a pyramid, it's the brain, and it's a labyrinth. And they found a way to depict three distinct things in one symbol. So we're talking something very curious here, and nobody's ever seen anything like it before. So these rooms are rectangular and square. Some of the wider passageways seem to curve, but they're different too. The red level is different than the blue level, which leads, and because it's so much deeper, it leads me to think that's two distinct civilizations as well. The same way as you'd see the Ptolemaic doesn't mix with the Roman. They're, a lot of years apart.
You were saying that this imagery provides a much higher resolution than we had before with ground penetrating radar. Is it possible to zoom in on any of the individual rooms and see any details inside, or is it just giving us more shape and layout?
Shape and elements. And so there are 6 chambers and this includes both levels with gold. And so that leads me to believe it hasn't been opened before. Otherwise, that gold would be gone. But it's so deep, I don't think anybody would have guessed what's possibly down there. And it also leads me to believe that it was meant not to be found. And so, yeah, and I don't even know if we're going to, get the permits. But certainly, there are exceptions for this site, and it seems that there are vested interests in being able to excavate it. But it's not easy to get anything done in Egypt, and Ramadan just finished, and so it could be that we get the ball rolling again. But this, even if we don't, I got the film permits to the rights to the filming, working with this particular team, and my vested interest is to not hide it from humanity. So to be able to, film it so that if the powers that be want to hide it, that we've already got the footage and we've, uploaded it, and so we don't know, but I think that it's humanity's right to know that something like this exists and to speculate. Now, the first step would be to drill boreholes at least 3 inches across, and then we could send a high-definition camera with an LED light down and rotate and film and do a 3D mapping that can then show us, even without excavating, what's in there. Now, it could be that the walls are gold and gilded, and it could be that there's gold objects in it, right? We don't know. But that's the thing. We can't pretend to know. This is a very good hypothesis. It's a very good beginning to what could be down there. But until we go in the field and verify it with the more precise instruments, we'll never know.
But that's the part that's exciting, because it is so new that we're all going to have the opportunity, crossing our fingers and toes and putting out really good energy on it, that we'll get to see this whole thing unfold and kind of travel along with a discovery like this.
Well, and that would be really nice, because we were talking GoPros and quadcopters and taking a photograph every 5 minutes and doing it in such a way that no one could hide what they're finding and take it away, and that we could keep people, posted on what we're finding live. Why not, if they'll allow it? But there's been so much hidden from humanity that it seems that that's what governments do, is they find things and hide them. And so maybe we're on a slippery slope with that, but that's my vision, is as we find it, you can see it.
Well, you just have to sit there and go, oh, well, we only think it's, like 1,500 years old, or 1,500 BC. Yeah, that's it. It's from 1,500 BC. It's not that old. But there's a pyramid on that site. Yes. What's the relationship do you think the relationship is between the pyramid and the structures? Because it's mud brick and it doesn't appear like it's really that old.
Well, mud brick pyramid in Egypt, the higher quality technology is older, and the more recent has smaller bricks and is not very good construction. So this mud brick, when it rains, starts to dissolve. And so they actually call it the weeping pyramid, because it kind of has rivulets going through where the water has eroded and then there's quite a lot of concern that this pyramid is getting damaged in a way that it can't be repaired. But to me, it seems like a completely different construction. So underneath, there are passageways, and there is a pyramid. It could be that there's another pyramid that's buried that's even deeper, and this is the one on top. So again, we won't know, but there's absolutely, and that's the thing. I'm always looking at layers and ages. And so, you know, these different layers, I mean, people kept returning to this site. So this pyramid is not in very good shape, and there is water inside it, but there's no water inside these chambers on either level. There's water underneath the lower level. And so, and not much. I call them puddles. Because of the canal, at first, the two teams that were researching in 2008, they were concerned that the chambers were full of water because there was water in the pyramid. But they had no way of checking it. So they had pledged $2.5 million to, quote-unquote, move the canal. Well, how do you move a canal? Like, that's quite a big undertaking, right? And so, but it's not necessary to move it if the water is not in there. So it's almost like somebody was kind of putting a decoy over the top, and at the end of Flinders Petrie's research, he said, "Oh no, don't go dig there because it's full of water, and so you'll never find anything anyway." And you know, I think he did. You know, he was there before. Archaeology didn't start till 1910, and he was there in 1890. He did 1881 to 1891. 10 years of digging in Egypt is the book, and yeah, so he basically was protecting it in that way. And when Louis de Belfond put the canal, I think this is an irrigation canal for the farms around it. And the other thing is that when you look at the satellite scan, you can see the chambers are as big as the farmers' fields. You know how crops change color. And, you know, it's as big as a field. It's like, excuse me? Why do they need them so big? And why don't they connect? The other thing is that, like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, that's dated at 13,000 years, which I think is older. It was at the top of a hill. It was decommissioned, very much like the Bosnian pyramids, as though they knew the flood was coming. And so they wanted to preserve the temple, so they filled it with rubble. They filled the Bosnian pyramid tunnels with rubble, and now they're both being excavated. But, yeah, there seems to be evidence that no one lived at Göbekli Tepe. There was 22 temples. I think one has been excavated. I haven't been. I was on my way and didn't make it. But so they're not dwellings. And I think the absence of pottery at this site means they weren't, well, it's one of the things that would point to them not being dwellings. Now, at Cappadocia in Turkey, you know, there was, you know, thousands and thousands of people that could live underground. Now, maybe there was some kind of solar activity that was preventing people from living above the ground or living on the surface. But I don't think that's what this is, because the chambers don't connect. They seem to be isolated units, almost like storage units. They don't seem to connect.
And you don't think that there is a connection with water, that it was some kind of power piece. You know how there's the belief that, you know, with the pyramids, there's always this water source associated with them because it helps to energize the pyramid. You don't think that that's the case in this location, that there's these chambers, but it's a water thing too?
No, because of the nature of that, and that's a very good question. Now, Dr. Sam talks about Osmanagic from the Bosnian pyramids, but 7 different characteristic features that have to work with straight-sided pyramids if they're going to be energy machines. And that's zigzag passageways underneath, a source of water underneath, the rising and falling of water levels, and straight-sided, and chambers within, built with quartz under pressure, and it goes on like that. That's not what we've got here. And I'm really sensitive to that information. So this is not a power plant. It's not an underground city. It seems to be isolated chambers. I think it's a repository. Now, I know that Atlantis had 3 different catastrophes, and I think that the second and third ones, they were able to predict what was going on, which is why something like Göbekli Tepe would have been decommissioned and that sort of thing, where they had prior knowledge. And so if they did, and they had all this technology and all these people, how would they have protected that? So, and there seems to have been enough warning to go and colonize other places on the planet, which could be why we're finding pyramids all over the world now, that are covered with trees, because if the straight-sided pyramids were there before the flood, silt would have been left as the water receded, which would have been enough soil to actually root trees. And so when you look across the countryside, you would never think it's a straight-sided pyramid because all the trees are different heights. And that's what we find in Bosnia. There's one in Serbia. There's some in South Africa. They're all over the world. They're finding these kinds of pyramids. Now, it happens that Giza has no trees on it because it's desert and the sand blew away.
Because there's no trees.
Because there's no trees, but there used to be. So in times past, as you probably saw in the Pyramid Code, it used to be tropical. And so we're all locked into the last 6,000 years thinking everything that we're finding is from that epoch. And that's why it's so challenging to put the pieces of the puzzle together, because we're talking about a completely different time frame.
If you were to throw out a guess, where would you place these lower two levels? Date-wise.
Okay, a guess, and
And we'll take it as a guess.
We'll take it as a guess, okay, because it's a hypothesis, but it fits with things that I've been looking for. So I think the blue level, the upper of the two, is a repository from Atlantis. I would suspect that there would be equipment, technology, records, and that's what it said in this document that I became aware of in 1996. But they were connecting it to Giza. I think the lower level is even older than that, and it could even be, and this sounds really, okay, I'm going to say it, when we arrive from off-planet, there's people who are having visions of places, and I put this together without telling them what I already know, 450,000 years ago. Well, that's a date that's resonating with Sitchin and the Anunnaki. Not that Sitchin's research was thorough and completely correct, but something happened. There was, disclosure hasn't happened in the States. They're still hiding the records, but there was some interface between star beings and Earth beings and some kind of colonization from off-planet, and we haven't really come up with anything that would verify that. And so, yes, there's art, and there's things that Chariot of the Gods has pointed out, and we're terribly curious about all this. Some people are, some people aren't. But it could be the orientation chambers that when they first came into the density of the Earth plane, they had to make some adjustments in order to be able to function if they were coming from off-planet. So the size of these chambers may have something to do with the technology that's in them, the reorientation to being on the planet, some kind of a, halfway house between the two, and then once they adjusted, they could come above ground and continue.
Well, I feel like with those beings in particular, had issues with daylight, sunshine.
Mm.
Anyway, moving on. Got things flying around over here. So it sounds like even with Zahi Hawass being gone, things really haven't changed in Egypt. That much.
Well, that's a sweeping statement because having gone there...
correct me then.
Well, yes and no. Okay, having gone there in April, I noticed, and we're staying right off Tahrir Square, and the energy was extremely positive. And we know that the media doesn't, report things accurately, and the people there felt quite energized by the whole revolution, even though we still have governments doing the same thing. So government offices haven't changed. I did meet the new Zahi, and I'm in touch with him on Skype regularly. And Zahi himself is just taken a job, apparently, doing a restoration of the Suez Canal, which I find interesting because of the association with Hawara and the guy who built the Suez Canal. Zahi himself never went to Hawara. He would, bark long and hard about there being nothing there, as he did with the underground passageways at Giza that I spent 5 years in and out of, that Klaus has a scan that shows the precision of what's down there. And so, it's like applying for a research grant, to a government office, or applying for a PhD. There's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of steps to take. There's rules. It has to be done correctly. The various roles of the archaeologist, principal investigator, and all that has to be precise. And I've applied for and gotten 3 of these grants through the Ministry of Education in Taiwan, so I understand the rigor of that. And I've applied for PhDs several times as well. So, it's not for the layperson to just say, I want to go dig there because, I'm somebody and therefore you should let me. It's far more scientific and precise than that in terms of the reports and, how the protocol goes and respecting, the Egyptian authorities and how all that works. And so I don't think many governments have changed very much, but there is a new group, there's a new wave coming through, and nobody's going to be just like Zahi Hawass.
So you've been to the location in Hawara. I want to say it right. Physically been there.
Uh-huh.
All right,
I went
so
there
I'm
in
going to
April.
ask.
I climbed to the top of the pyramid, and to my amazement, there's another pyramid about 20 miles away. And as you saw in the pyramid code, every pyramid site, you can see the next site. And so there's another series of pyramids there.
Okay, so here's my question. That is cool, but here's my question, and you're the only person I would ask that. So what was your vibe of the area? What were you feeling or picking up? Because I'm sure you were kind of like checking in while you were there or sitting on the top of the pyramid. That'd be a great spot.
Well, I get it that there's something down there, and it's quite an isolated site. Like the watchmen can go for weeks and weeks without a single person coming there. So I think it's entirely possible that there's stuff that we have never seen before that we couldn't even conceive. And as we've been making the plans and measuring the site and collecting some data just from the scan itself, and a little trepidation kind of went through me about like, well, what if what we find, if we get to do it, is what we find is really, really strange, and we've never seen anything like it. Because that's what seemed to be indicated from that document from 1996. It wasn't written. It was an ancient text. It wasn't written in 96. Because they were finding like cogs in a machine, things that looked like computer disks but bigger. And the other thing was that it's like light keys, where as the team approached in this document from ancient times, the stone moved with, abracadabra kind of mantra, and then they went down, 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 down. Everything was dusty and dank. It sounded terrible. And then when they approached this place, all of a sudden everything was clean. As they moved forward, the place was illuminated, and it was, it was almost like their presence was lighting it up. And I've heard of that before. They do call it light keys in the literature. And so, this is very strange, and it's not something we're doing now. But, in terms of the high-level initiates, where they had the command of the transmutation of the atom, they were able to do bilocation, teleportation, telepathy, alchemy, manifestation, all of that. And so, we're not talking about the recent past of us now in the limited way we think of things, right? And again,
well, exactly. I mean,
school and religion wants us to think that this is all we have.
And I find it so interesting because our mentality toward that whole part of ourselves has been so washed out of us, and I don't know what happened. And that's my new little research project, is trying to connect the dots of why we changed.
Well, in my mind, because my research, my original research question before Angels and Archetypes and Evolutionary Math of Feminine Consciousness was, if we had matriarchal cultures that gave way to patriarchy, what happened? How did we go from being peaceable, non-warring, community-oriented, leaving more for the children, respecting the earth, respecting elders, to this, blood from death instead of blood from life? And so we've lost a lot in terms of, now I think, and I've said it before, that I think the agenda of the patriarchy has been to erase evidence of everything other than itself.
Well, yeah, so?
Yeah, so that's why we can't remember. That's why we don't know what came before it. Now, there's fragments.
But I also
of knowledge.
think that it's just so old that we forgot. We don't talk about it because it's not important. And
well, it's important. Of course it's important, but we systemically have been trained to forget. In school, we're told what to think, not how to think. And so this is, if you just look at David Icke and, talking about mind control and keeping people traumatized through visions of things that, are terrifying and beheadings and all that. And then you make a suggestion and people go, okay, and they just believe it. And so, this has been a long, slow deterioration of high states of consciousness.
And I just asked the question, what's the end game? What's the frickin' end game?
Well, to have us all enslaved and on our knees and, desperate.
But they had us there before.
Well, I know, but that's why I think that it's dangerous to say the Anunnaki had us all enslaved, because what's the supposition there is that we're not enslaved now. And I feel from past life work and from just what's going on in my cellular memory that we really had a very peaceful, glorious, utopian kind of planet where people actually did get along and it was healthy and creative and all of that. And we've really departed from that. I mean, people's brain power is slowed right down. People got like a 2-minute attention span. It's like...
Well, we've been trained to do that, though. We've been trained to have that short attention span. We get enough drugs. We sit on the sofa and watch TV. We eat crappy food. We don't move around or do anything. And we become little slugs.
Well, and and that's not so threatening. But there's a whole movement. There's a lot of people who are hanging on to, the message in the Pyramid Code and other things. There's a lot of people who are very, very interested in this material. Now, we've also lost our way in terms of how to do research correctly, and that's a platform that I stand on because I taught research methods at the grad level for years. And I think it's important to give credit where credit is due and look around. Now, a lot of ancient texts are printed online today. I saw something where the Vatican has released 4,000 ancient documents.
I know.
Online. Oh, my God.
But none of them are in English, but that's okay. Someone will translate them. But
well, that's okay is right. I mean, if they weren't written in English, give them to me anyway.
That's right. You were mentioning this ancient text that talked about the chamber and stuff. Do you know what the name of the text is? And is that one online in English?
Well, it's in English. It's Chelsea Floor who gave it to me, and it had no cover page. And I had a photocopy of it, and this was way back, 96, so I don't have it anymore, and I do not know the name of it, and it may be there. But it makes me realize, though, when things like this, all they had to do was say, it's at the Great Pyramid, and nobody'd find what they're looking for, right? Because they just deviate and say, don't look over here, look over there. Like a magician, doing the trick with the left hand, and really the right hand is doing the part that they don't want you to see. So, no, I don't have that information.
Okay. See, I like reading stuff like that. I feel like a weirdo, but I like reading that kind of material.
Well, yeah, and I've read most of the ancient texts and, given it 10 years and then read them again. And, a lot of things. I did it 3 times over a 30-year period of time. And a lot of things are really kind of cryptic. And we have to have some kind of wherewithal in order to be able to get the crumb of information that we're looking for. So yeah, it's a long process to go through this. So people say, oh, you got that, fine. Tell me which ancient text I should read. But just like anything, you can read a lot and most of it's wrong, and then you pick up a crumb. It's like, and so this thing of learning to be able to discern, what's accurate and what isn't, and how to tell the difference is the task. So it's not just getting access to the books. It's how to work your way through it, because the guidebook for, our distant past has not been created, and I don't think it's likely to be created. It's just too complex, and it's too much of a mystery. It's the best mystery we've got, though.
But many times you read a text and then you continue in your research, and then for some reason you end up circling back to it, and the knowledge you gained as you move forward, you come back and go, oh, now that makes sense. Where
I know exactly what you mean.
Before it was like, okay, whatever, moving on.
Yeah, what is all this stuff? Like, and the other thing is, it seems like it's full of contradictions. Well, so is the news. Watch the news for 10 minutes, and it's full of contradictions. And that's cognitive dissonance, where your brain goes, well, I mean, that's contradicting the other thing. And then the commercial comes in, and, the idea is that you're going to go buy something because they mixed up your brain. So, I mean, to find, and the other thing is that, when people wrote these texts, they weren't necessarily that aware. It was squarely within the patriarchal era, which is all about power over and thinking that the Egyptians were kind of infantile and misguided. And maybe that's not how it was at all. But we're piecing it together. I mean, collaboratively, people are bringing their puzzle pieces, and there's, lots of people that I've been interviewed by, and now I am interviewing because I have a interactive view TV show 2 hours a week on Conscious Consumer Network. And, there's people with, large bodies of work that have done credible research. There's a lot of people standing on stage at the speaker circuit that have not done credible research. But as long as that's encouraged and people give credit where credit is due, we are marching our way toward a deeper understanding. And some people have led us down the garden path and given us stuff that's misleading. But by and large, I think we're really getting there.
And I will agree. I had a whole conversation on Facebook with this guy talking about researchers that will put out information. And in my opinion, the people that he was naming, and I'm not going to name the names, but the people he was naming, I found were credible researchers. And so I was like, he goes, but they're not staying with the status quo. And they're ruining their careers because they're putting out this stuff that there's no evidence for. That there's no evidence for. And it's like, well, just because there's no evidence doesn't say that their research or their theories are wrong or incorrect. And, the history has been, there's what the system says, and then there's anybody that says something outside the system, and they're all of a sudden, crazy.
Yeah, and that's how they want it. And that the term conspiracy theorist is one of those catch-all phrases, like public relations, which I just described the cognitive dissonance, and then they, give you a product. Conspiracy theorist is a garbage pail for anybody who doesn't agree with the powers that pretend and the story on the media and what they say in school, and they just toss the whole person into this garbage can and call him a conspiracy theorist. But because you got a PhD, that anybody who is quote-unquote a theorist has had to do research for up to 10 years and come up with something original, demonstrate it over and over again scientifically, and then they get to have their own theory. Well, in 1 nanosecond, somebody gets to be a conspiracy theorist, so it's obviously a fabricated term that's meant to just keep people in the collective drinking the Kool-Aid. And so, but the thing is now, I think with alternative media, shows like yours and a number of others, there's a growing movement of people who, and even the millennials, kids who were born after the year 2000, I mean, they watch TV, they know it's garbage. They're often vegetarian because they don't think they should be eating their friends, and it's it's just something that a lot of us have been indoctrinated into, and some of us are just not buying it anymore. So I say let's put a firewall between the naysayers and the rest of us, and work together to make sense of something that we're getting really close to understanding.
Well, and you bring up a really great point. I remember being a little kid, there were all the, women's libbers and bra burners and, and so by the time I was moving into my maturity, it was like, I just assumed I was equal, and then as I've gotten older, I've seen, the whole gay and lesbian concept where, back in the day, you still stayed in the closet, and now you go to a high school and you ask the teenagers, are you gay? And they'll openly say yes or no. And not, so it's changing. And so there's this whole generation or multiple that are being brought up with the concept of, well, maybe what we're being told in school isn't right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think
the education system's really doing a lot of damage. So I see that with interactive view when people come and they're all shut down, their self-esteem is low, and school really it does more damage than good, if you ask me.
Exactly. But, well, they don't really teach anybody. I mean, they teach them some stuff. I don't know. I'm not even going to get off on a whole big tangent about education because it's scary and sickening. What we see
That's
happening.
the word. It's sickening.
Because, I mean, they're getting educated, but if you compare what they're being taught to what was taught 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever, it's like a fraction of the information. And now you can get your associate's degree while you're still in high school because you can take college courses in high school. It's like, really? Whatever.
Well,
okay.
Also, they're still teaching memorizing facts, and the banking system of education where the teacher deposits the information to the student, then they give it back on the test, but you've got a smartphone. All the information is right there. You can look up the facts. Why do you have to memorize them?
But then in other areas like math, it's like they just teach them how to use the calculator, and it doesn't make them have to memorize. I mean, I think that there in certain areas, there is a place for memorization. And I can't imagine having to whip out a calculator every time I needed to add something together or to do a quick division problem because I never learned how to do it.
Oh, I know. Oh, no, there's big problems. Definitely big problems. But the worst one being boring kids. And you can't walk down, you finish your work, you can't go down the hall until the bell rings. All of this is modeled on jail. The people who build jails build schools. I mean, it's just appalling. And it just doesn't work for kids to have to sit there. I mean, it's not natural for young children to have to sit in rows and be still. So, yeah, there's tons of problems there. But
I think that, there are so many parents that are choosing to homeschool, or there are, from what I understand, some collectives of people that are taking turns homeschooling little groups of kids. So I feel like society is like people are kind of rounding up around themselves, and that it's not just school, that people are saying, I need to take care of ourselves, become more sustainable, become more self-sufficient, which includes education, which includes, well, I'll just have my thoughts and let big government be over there. We live in very interesting times.
They make it illegal in Germany to do homeschooling. And then there's unschooling.
Are you kidding me?
No. And it's illegal in some states as well. Okay, so homeschooling is taking the curriculum that's taught at school, and instead of teaching it in 6 hours, you teach it in shorter periods of time because there's not so many interruptions. But it's still the curriculum at school, and you still go and do the tests. Unschooling is letting a child follow their passion, study, sea otters in a kayak and film it and then change their mind about what they want to do next. And then world schooling is a new one where parents will take their kids on a sailboat around the world or traveling at length or climbing Mount Kilimanjaro and see what they can learn on these adventure projects. And so there's lots of ways to do this. So there's a program in Interactive View called Interactive School for Kids, which is basically support for parents who are homeschooling their kids.
Wow, I didn't even know there were so many options. But again, you have to be willing, like we've been talking about earlier, to step outside of the box, to step outside of the system, to take the blinders off and go, what do I believe? What do I think? Where am I going? And taking the responsibility back on yourself instead of giving it up to somebody else, just like our history, just like our monuments, like everything we're experiencing today.
Absolutely. Touché.
Well, all right. Okay, so you're going to laugh, but I got a call from Bruce Cunningham yesterday, and he said, and make sure you have Carmen talk about the trip to Indonesia. Yeah. In Indonesia. So where are you going? What's going on?
Okay, so Bruce has invited me to be a guest host, and there's never been a sacred site journey to this site. It's one of the most recent discoveries, and Graham Hancock has gone there and done some investigating. They have actually found a pyramid there that they've dated to 23,000 years ago. And so the head archaeologist will be available to us on this trip. And then we're also going to Borobudur, which is a temple in Indonesia that's really, really quite spectacular. They say it's not that old, but it must be built on a more ancient site because it's definitely got the energy. And then there's these statues that have the pointed fingers resting on the belly like you see on Easter Island. You see in Bolivia at Tiwanaku. You see at Göbekli Tepe, and you see that here as well. And so, this tour is organized by Ancient Mysteries International. Everybody's welcome to come. It's extremely good value because in Asia you can do 4-star. It doesn't have to be 5-star like in Egypt. And Egypt's pretty grungy if you're not in the 5 stars. But so it's really, really good value. It's not that expensive. Even flights out of San Francisco, LA on the West Coast to Jakarta are quite reasonable. And so Bruce has done a really nice job of pulling that trip together. So I hope people take an interest in it, and you can contact him or me about that. And that's November 28th to December 6th.
And we have like 1 minute, so let me ask you, because you have a big conference that you're going to be speaking at in Canada, is that, or has that happened? Okay,
no, it's August 29th and 30th. Now, the Modern Knowledge Tour goes straight across Canada, starting on the East Coast. They did it last year, and I spoke in Vancouver. This year, they're adding Victoria. And so I'll be on stage in Vancouver August 29th, Victoria August 30th, with Michael Cremo, who I can't wait to meet, Nassim Haramein, and Marty Leeds, all of which I'm very keen to speak with. And so each city has got different speakers. It's called Modern Knowledge Tour 2015. It's organized by David Whitehead and Chris Russick, who do an excellent job. And it really gathers like-minded people. I was quite impressed with the audience when I spoke last year, because there's no convincing. You don't have to tell people, why they should think differently. They already do. They're like, now what? So it seems that this year is far more solution-oriented, and last year was a little bit more, okay, we're in a mess. This is the kind of mess we're in. But no, it's really, really strong in terms of who connects, and it really is creating a community across the country. And I've got people coming up from the States for it. So I'm very pleased to be speaking at this conference.
Cool. Carmen, our time is up, so I'm going to have to let you go, but thank you so much for coming on and sharing this information. And when you get like some new updates or information, please let me know so we can get you scheduled back on and keep us up to date.
I certainly will. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Okay, bye, Carmen.
Bye-bye, Rita.
That's Carmen Boulter. Her website is pyramidcode.com. And next week, we're going to be speaking with C.M. Mayo about the secret book of Francisco Madero. And in the second hour with Juan Milo Duquette.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy